Welcome back to the PMR podcast. My name's Andrew. I'm an addict and an alcoholic. This is episode 47. Really excited for this one. As you can see, we have a special guest. We've had a really great string of guests, I think, over the past few weeks, and we're just keeping it rolling, Mitch, huh?
Keeping it rolling. Welcome back, episode 47. Very excited for this one. Bringing on a good friend of mine. I've been working with him in a treatment setting for the last couple months now. Really helped me along the way the entire time with any questions I've ever had. And in terms of career, what he's doing is something that I'd like to be doing at some point. So I admire him in a lot of ways. And he is a licensed marriage and family counselor or therapist, but also working a lot with and specializing in mental health and substance abuse. He's does it all, really. We wanted to welcome Michael to the podcast today.
Hey guys, hey Mitch, hey Andrew, good to be here.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
really excited to be part of this conversation, and I've been looking forward to it, since Mitch, you and I kind of started talking about it a little while ago. So, yeah, good to be here.
Yeah. Super excited for this one. And we do have one little trick question for you to
Love
jump
it.
off. I know I had something up my sleeve here, but we do like to ask our guests. And I'm super interested to hear your perspective on it. But when you think of an addict or an alcoholic or someone struggling with substance, what does that look like to you?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a great question to kind of lead off with. Um, yeah, when I think about that, in both kind of and I'll say all this like most of my answers are going to be kind of a mix of personal and maybe some professionally influenced kind of perspectives, and I'll kind of begin with on a personal note. It's like I I think about the wide range of exposure I had kind of growing up to different folks that struggled with substance, and it was kind of a wide range from folks that were like really, really highly functional and like really successful in their recovery to people that really, you know, really struggled with the day to day. So I think when I think about someone that is dealing with a drug or alcohol addiction, whether it be in recovery or active, or, um, you know, I think about the people in my life that I know, whether it was like, somebody that was like long time sober and seemed to really be kind of clicking in and kind of being able to kind of do the work, to folks that were still struggling and out there, and kind of looking on and trying to maybe like hope for them that at some point they were going to touch that point of motivation. um, but that's kind of like it's hard for me not to go to those like personal stories that are
Mhm.
woven into my youth and family and friends. And then when when I think about kind of the professional lens that I think about, it's like, oh, something in a human being's life is causing such a level of distress, and there's a need to cope in some way,
Mm.
and the thing that became available to them through whatever means was a substance, drugs or alcohol, which then helped to ease whatever the burden was of whatever's causing the distress. And that's not to kind of um, and then that took on a life of its own, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's like, I think about somebody that is suffering with something, and the seemingly only thing that has been able to help ease that to that point was with kind of drinking or engaging in drug use. So it was like, oh, there's some suffering under there that is so intense that the only way to deal with it that has been available is to do this other thing, which, oh, by the way, then compounds it, because
Yeah.
right, it creates all the other problems and all the other stuff. But um so I don't know if that, what how that kind of resonates or lands for you.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a beautiful, very nuanced answer, and it's Mitch. I don't know if we've heard something that comprehensive in our answers so far from our guests. I don't think I don't think I could come up with an answer like that. You know, I hear as well, like in your personal answer, that you had exposure early on to recovery. Um, and as much as you're comfortable going into that, because a lot of people, for instance, like for me, I didn't, as a kid and growing up, I didn't really know what recovery was, or um I saw the one side of addiction and had my own idea of it, which is kind of like stereotypical homeless man under a bridge with a bottle and a paper bag. But I didn't see the recovery side of it. So, I mean, I think that's beautiful that you were exposed to that. What did that look like
Welcome
for
back
you?
to the PMR podcast. Before we get into this week's episode, I wanted to share with you our first partnership with Clean Cause. Clean Cause is a pretty awesome company. They sell yerba mate drinks. The founder is in recovery, and they put 50% of their net profits back into those struggling with addiction and alcoholism. Absolutely love their company, absolutely love their message, and very thankful for them to partner with us. If you're interested in getting some, you go to their website, cleancause.com. All right. When you're checking out, you're going to enter in Mitch20 into the discount code area, and that's going to get you 20% off on these fire drinks. Right now, I got that cherry lime. All right. Enjoy this week.
Yeah, well, let me maybe set some context kind of because I think that's helpful. I grew up in a smaller kind of community in Pennsylvania, and growing up, specifically alcohol use at that point, kind of in the 80s, 90s, was really normalized in a way as a coping, as really interwoven into social dynamics and in like gatherings, it and to this day, like I return home there and I visit and I see people, like it's like, how you sometimes can't really describe what, but you kind of see people in the world and you're like, oh, there's something going on here, and I just kind of, you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, growing up, that kind of was, normalized. And then kind of as I got into my, teens and my, 20s, I began to, just see how much kind of suffering was, being, medicated with that. So I'm setting that as the context that I feel like the ecosystem that I grew up in really normalized substance and alcohol use in a way that was like coping and normalized, and kind of like there was a lot of passes given, and drinking culture was like really big, and it feels like it still is. And sadly, there's now kind of you know uh, new dynamics and substances in the mix, especially as the 2000s introduced kind of, big opiate kind of stuff. Um, so, and then as far as like, seeing recovery, it probably wasn't until I was, I don't know that I saw really outward healthy, like talked about recovery. Like you would know that, like, oh, there's people that are struggling and they went to treatment, and that it doesn't serve a discussion in the ecosystem, right? So the reason why I'm kind of bringing that up is because it I don't know that I really had, until I made some decisions in my life to kind of lead a sober life and kind of get involved in sobriety for my own survival, that I really was able to start seeing kind of what that looked like. Because in growing up kind of where I did, it felt like there's like still a lot of stigma associated with substance. And kind of what you described, Andrew, of like the guy living under the bridge. What's like, well, these are people that are suffering, and that don't necessarily find their way.
Right.
So yeah, so it probably wasn't until, when I was like in my 20s and even beyond, where it was like, oh, what are some healthy examples? And and I think part of that comes from, there's like some inherent, I think part of my graduate work was really looking closely at um, the experience of shame, and how that kind of interweaves into our experience as humans, and it drives mental health, and it also drives us to cope with drugs or alcohol. And I think the toxicity of shame can mean, oh, maybe uh I might be sober, but it may be really difficult for me to talk about. Or, you know, I I still have a difficult time like being someone that can view myself as maybe a potential role model.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I just say that because I think that's kind of an interesting thing when I think back on the different examples or the different folks. It's like, oh, there's still like sobriety is one thing, physical sobriety, and then there's like, the work that really begins at that point, which can often be untangling. What's my experience of shame? What was the underlying suffering? What was the trauma like? And that can kind of get in the way of like, you know, being able to serve as an example in some way.
Right. Right. And I think too, like to your point, I think, there were plenty of examples of around me growing up of people because, recovery existed like as I was growing up, but um, like you said, that experience of shame, I think a lot of people that I've seen or worked with or been involved with, I mean, and myself included, like I got sober, physically sober, like you say, but the shame kind of remains. And although I'm not using drugs or alcohol to cope for whatever reason, I'm in treatment or I'm now working with a therapist or I'm working with whatever it may be. um I don't my recovery is not something like you almost said, there's no room for conversation for it in the ecosystem. Like I
Mm-hmm.
don't just bring it up when I'm out grabbing a cup of coffee and having a conversation with somebody. And so I think, again, like to the many points that you brought up, like there's a stigma not only surrounding drugs and alcohol, but also surrounding like recovery. I think people don't generally talk about it, unless they're in, you know, in that, landscape, like of a treatment center or working, in therapy or, for instance, Mitch and I and you having this conversation over Zoom because we're all in that kind of that field and in that world. But on the outside, like it doesn't happen. So it's interesting because I had plenty of examples that I could have potentially seen and potentially would have served me well to see, but early on, I didn't. I saw the one side, which was the normalized use and the normalized drinking, and I didn't see the other side, which was people who had struggled and were now getting well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's there's I've had moments where, you know, I will reflect back on experiences witnessing different people using alcohol in different ways, from my youth, and like um, I'm vague about this because some of these people are still out in the world, of course, and they're still doing what they're doing, and they're on their journey, so I want to not be super specific, given for their privacy.
Right.
But kind of thinking back to specific instances of somebody engaging in a substance use in a certain way and not really knowing how that fits into the function of a life, and like all of a sudden being like in my 20s or early 30s and being like, hey, so and so used to drink in this way at this time of day in this context, and be like,
Yeah.
wow, why didn't I in that moment? And it's because, well, I didn't have a frame of reference, right? I didn't have um it wasn't part of a dialogue. There was like a need to kind of like normalize or in some way discount or minimize or like, kind of, we're not going to really talk about that.
Mm.
And I'm grateful to have that insight today. And also like in the therapeutic kind of realm, I'm like, oh, I'd want to get the time machine and go back to that younger me and just kind of throw my arm around him and say like, hey, I need you to know that like this is a little confusing right now, and that this is someone that's doing something that is it may not be the things that you want to look to aspire to or
Right.
feel like are in the normal column, but hey, don't have that time machine, and I've lived the life I've led since then. So
Yeah. I really like the concept of like everything prior to maybe even getting into recovery or working in recovery, that there is like a barrier of entry or like a kind of like a mist about it. And I think that like talking with people outside of and like talking with my friends and stuff like that, I was in a lot of cases their first instance or connection to recovery or substance abuse and addiction. And so as I was being educated on it, I was kind of educating them along the way with that. And I think that's something that I've grappled with throughout my entire sobriety. And I think that is something that spurred the the present moment recovery in general. And because you talked about shame, and that's why I started to think about, like, I think I had a lot of shame, but it's really interesting in recovery. I feel like I am balancing shame and pride pretty much consistently. And like something that Andrew and I are very in tune with and aware of with this podcast specifically is like, you know, I feel like technically we may be in some eyes breaking anonymity,
Mm.
and we may be promoting or may, if you don't watch all of it and you're not fully I guess don't listen to like how we do try to express that we're not, but it could come across as prideful, or we're not making any money, but it could like we're trying to make money off AA, or we're trying to make money off our recovery, or trying to look at us sort of thing. So it's like always in the back of my head with stuff like this, like I don't want to live in fear or shame, and or like um scared to talk about it or don't want to talk about it. And I also don't want to be like on the street with a sign and like, shoving it down everyone's, throat that's driving by. Trying to find a balance there where it's like all we're trying to do, is talk about it in an open way, I guess. And the other thing that came to mind is like working in recovery. Something that I've learned over the past like 8 months is, when I meet people um at work or anything like that, it's not like I introduce myself and be like, I'm in recovery, or I'm going to an AA meeting tonight or whatever it is. It's trying to find that balance, and through talking with my sponsor and stuff, if it comes up or if they ask, that might be an appropriate time. Kind of each individual situation is different, but I did want to ask you, like, when it comes to working in recovery, how do you balance like working in recovery and your own mental health and your own like, everyone has their own like life things too, because I know, just off the first 8 months, some days it's hard for me to leave work at work, and it's I've had bits and times where I like interlace my recovery and working in recovery. So
yeah, I think that what a valuable and critical part of the like just conversation of um I and I think anybody that's in any kind of helping professional role ought to really, let me just say, I think that it's important for me to, um, yeah, pay very close attention to like what is going on for me. and what is happening. And, you know, I'll kind of share that, you know, being in this field in this way, in like a formal kind of way, the last half a dozen years, I have gone through just different eras of learning about myself as a human, doing work, helping another human,
Mm.
and knowing that, like, oh, I need to like pay attention to, and I've started to understand what are the different signs or signals that something is out of joint.
Mm.
Like one, couple things are like, and it's kind of strange and interesting, but like if I find myself starting to have dreams that are about some of the work that I'm doing with other people, right? It's like, and they're typically like not good ones, they're like anxiety dreams. That usually is a signal to me of like, okay, what is going on here as far as like, am I taking on more of the responsibility here than is really my role? Where are my
Mm.
boundaries in this, right? Because, you know, it is, you know, I had a supervisor for the first couple of years of, you know, my time in grad school, and she would make the joke, but she would use it to illustrate like, hey, we, therapists are like, can be all, and really anybody in a helping role can be like, become professional codependents, where it's like, oh, cool. My training in my youth was all about paying attention to everything else around me and figuring out the right solution, and now I can get paid for that. And not only that, but I can get like my ego stroked for that. And she would use it as a way to be like, it is really important to know that we're here doing something for other people, and we have limits and we have bounds, right?
Mm.
I have, sure, I have a set of skills, and I work in within a context as being a therapist, but my goodness, I have to really pay attention to, you know, I'm only responsible for my end. And that can mean that someone can not follow recommendations. They cannot choose to really pick up skills. They can, and sometimes it's not just the choice piece, right? It's maybe they're just not capable of it in that moment. Maybe not reach the point of insight, judgment, clarity. Um, and, you know, I realize I'm kind of wandering in my answer, but Mitch, I like the idea of like, what is it and how do I bring myself into my work? It's like that kind of that kind of changes on a daily basis and context to context, because, you know, like as a therapist, I have to be really mindful, or anyone in a role that's helping others, mindful of like, what is it that I'm thinking about sharing with this person? Is this because I'm looking to give myself the boost? Is it because I'm looking that it's going to serve them? Is it because I'm needing some connection that I should be getting met elsewhere? And it's like, well, my clients are not my friends, and I can't be treating them as such. And you know, that's kind of something that we, as I think as people in professions to help, need to be almost looking at on a daily basis, like, and it can be really difficult. Like I went through eras where I would felt like I was so invested in like an outcome that I was starting to feel the pressure as though I was in control of it all. And it's like, well,
Mm.
there's like a red light on the dashboard that's like, well, hold on a second. If I start doing that, then I'm running the show for everybody else. And then like, how are they going to be able to begin kind of running their own show? Um, you know, the other piece that um, I think has been important is to just have people around that I can be in consultation with, I can talk to, I can help to kind of like, and get honest feedback from, to say like, am I too much in this? Is this like, and have people that I trust that can be able to say, you're you're only going to be able to do so much for somebody, because they may not be at a point in time where they're this may not be the point in their journey where they're going to pick up this tool, or they're going to be able to make the choice to go right when they've always gone left.
Mm.
And but it is like, I think for all of us, if we're in this, it's like we're here because we have the experience. We're here because we can bring our passion to it, but it also requires us to like learn and figure out what are the signals and the signs of like, oh, I'm too much invested in this, and I need to know where I end.
Hmm.
You know, and that doesn't mean that because I know that I can only do so much that I don't have a, you know, care and hope. It just knows that like for my own ability to keep doing this work, it yeah, it really is it's important to know that and kind of pay attention to it.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I think I've learned a lot from talking with you and working with you, and I feel super blessed to be working in the environment that I'm in with like the professionals around me, because I get a lot from just listening and what kind of watching. And I think I've talked with Andrew the whole time because he started working in treatment a couple months before me. So and that's actually what spurred me to get my act together. Thank you, Andrew.
It's an arms race, Mitch. It's always
Yeah.
been an arms race with you and me.
In a positive way.
Yeah.
But it's like I've had a lot of conversations with you know, does rehab work, does therapy work, does like what works, you know, like, and I feel like we're always kind of chasing this, potentially maybe subconsciously, this like, if you do this and this, that's going to work. And like the
Yeah.
hardest part is that every single person has a different concoction that's going to work for them. And
Yeah.
like for me, what happened with me that worked, you know, and got me to this point. But I feel sometimes I'm frustrated with not with the actual your clients or anything like that, but like frustrated with like, you know, why isn't that working for them, why isn't that working for this, you know, why, how do they not see it? And then I have to recall my experience, you know, and that like there were multiple years in a row where I like went to an outpatient first before going to inpatient, and I did all these things before and I didn't surrender myself. And so I have to recall how hard it was and how many consequences I needed to face before it became a decision to turn. So I wanted to hear, like, for you, when working with someone, um, how does it look if, you know, you work with someone for a period of time, and then like like how does success look
Mhm.
like to you? Is there success in this field? Is there like completion or any sort of feeling of like, you know, I did my job, you know? I mean, is there anything ever like that?
Yeah. I like that question. And the first, you know, there's a couple different. I'm thinking about the different ways in which I would look at that whole topic in question. You know, first and foremost, you know, the idea of like what is success, and I think about it like when I sit in the therapist chair. You know, you know, my initial reaction is like, okay, well, success is like someone, let's say somebody comes into the room and sits down. It's like, well, what is it that they're looking for? You know, like what do they see as the areas that they would like to improve, or they'd like to gain insight on, or the areas that they feel like they'd like to reduce. So it in the way that I really look at things, I think about like, you know, from a client's perspective, like what are they after? You know, like something's bringing them into the room, whether it's in a treatment setting or in a private practice setting that I do work in, is kind of that. And um, you know, because that again is like that thing to pay attention to. It's like I might have lots of things that I think about when I look at and hear someone else's story, but I it's not for me to say, right?
Mm,
It's like, you know, it's not for me to say whether something is um, a particular relationship or the way that they engage in substance, or maybe their level of like anxiety or depression, or maybe the way that they operate. I, it, it's really, and this was something that I kind of through graduate school and, kind of traineeship, it's kind of really looking closely at, what are the biases that I have in the world, and how do I as a therapist need to um, set them aside or sort through them to be able to say, like, do I have a bias? Am I in some way bringing my point of view to, or my agenda? And because really some of the first kind of things is like, as a therapist, is kind of join the client and figure out where they're at and what's important to them. And that kind of first and foremost sometimes is like, feels like that's the criteria for success. Am I learning the experience of the person? Am I understanding or coming to understand what's important for them? Um, because that's kind of why I'm there to honor their self-determination and their agency. And that kind of looks more like a process. And so, like, to me, that's like success. Like, oh, we are building an alliance, and we're building a way of communicating so that we can work on what's important to you. And that obviously, there can still be conversations where, like, there can still be challenge, right? It's like, oh, I'm seeing that there's a lot of chaos here, and I'm wondering, like, does this feel like it's okay? Is this something that you would want to experiment a little bit with to see if, turning that down could lead you to, maybe some of the other outcomes that you're looking for? um, and so yeah, I think success looks a lot of different ways as a therapist, because it, for somebody, especially, a conversation that we might have or some work that we do for, a short period of time could be what leads them to some future step, so that way when they're ready, like, I know in different eras of my life, I've been working with different therapists, and like, some things felt too radioactive early on to talk about. So maybe, like, part of my experience is like, as a gay man, was like working through all the shit in my youth that then meant that it was really difficult to accept myself and then eventually come out. So it's like, over here, I have the part of the story where I kind of finally was able to, like, have that conversation. But then over here was some early times in therapy where that just felt like it was too radioactive to even talk about. Yet maybe it was even just like having like the subtle kind of discussion of like, maybe, and it's like, that very well could have been a really important thing that kind of helped kind of pretty later on. So that's why it's like, the idea of success in that therapy could have been like, okay, I was able to, like, say, hey, maybe I am, gay, and then like never speak about it again for the next X, years. So it feels like, the idea of like success can really vary. And sometimes as a therapist, I just have to trust that I'm showing up, I'm doing what I need to do, and that in the longer arc of a person's journey, that it's serving something. So it is like, there is a level of like letting go and surrender in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for a little background, I don't work I'm not a licensed therapist or any of that. I work as a certified recovery coach. I work with a handful of guys around my age, and it's like, as you said, it's tough sometimes to meet them where they're at, like, because I have my own ideas of where they need to be, of what they need, of what success should look like for them. And when I say those words, like, even now, like, what gives me, what what gives me the right, and like how much ego do I have to say like I know where they need to be? It's and it's a humbling experience to work with, with guys, and in my situation, it's all individuals who are struggling with addiction problems. And for some things that I think are so simple, it's even in this space of addiction treatment where I think one could make the argument that there's at least a semblance of a formula that works for most. Like, I have found that's not the case. Like, it's things that work for millions of people may not work for this individual. Like,
Yeah.
things that work, that should work for the type of person or the type of personality he has, the type of interests, it may not be the solution. And so I think, like, to what you said, and I think you expressed it in a way I've never really heard, and you kind of ignited something in me, is like success for me with working with these guys is like really a me thing. It's like, am I showing up open-minded and like with squashing my ego enough to where I'm not going to decide what their fate is going to be, or tell an individual that I'm working with, like, you need to, because I can find myself doing it. I get my own motives like intertwined with
Yeah.
theirs, and that's really, really dangerous. So I thank you, number one, for kind of that definition of success, because it's like, it's weird to kind of, it could come off like as like, oh, selfish, like that that's the definition of, that is success in this setting for me. But it really is like, I can't define success for this person. Like, that's up to them. Like, the only success that I can define is the person that I'm bringing to them, the attitude that I'm bringing to them. And it's infuriating and like frustrating to see um people not get it. Like, or not get it is in, not, if their aim was to stay sober, them not stay sober. um
Yeah.
when you see, or at least I think I see the easy fix. But like, that's something I need to always catch myself on. Is something that I may think is really, really, really should be self-evident to this person, is it may not be the solution at all. And it's that's what makes this work. Like, for me at least, I see so much burnout. Like, people come in and they grind at it for a half a dozen, maybe 8, 10 years, if they get there, and then it's just like they can't do it anymore at all,
Yeah.
because a lot of people too who work in this space, and it's the case for me, is like, I am a recovering drug addict. So I don't really do things halfway. And because of that, like, I'll just be in a space where I'm like meeting with these guys, and we're like, I'm real invested, where it's not like I shouldn't be invested. But like you said, there's a boundary that I need to honor, or I won't last very long or be helpful to anyone. Yeah. No.
Yeah,
I
it's not an easy. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's not an easy, like, because it's it is a highly, like, in some ways it can be real cut and dry. Here's a line, right? And in other ways it's like, well, having great care and great investment is not something that ought to be discouraged. However, it's like, oh, it is, you know, when do I start feeling the impact of, the fact that I'm not controlling somebody else's choices.
Mm.
I can't make them end the situation that's causing them this. I can't, and And, that's where like it would come back to me. It's like, did I do the things that were in my control? Did I show up in a way? And does this person know that, like, while this thing might have happened, hey, there's still, you can still come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Something that you touched on a little bit ago. I really like listening to you guys on that. I couldn't agree more with it. But I think it's really fascinating, Michael, how you were kind of touching on the pieces and the seeds along the way and how those kind of stack or grow whenever they're ready to, And I think there's maybe solace for us working in this field that we may not see it immediately how I want it, like my will, like I want you to get it now, and why don't you get it now, But over time, you have no idea what was said or heard or seen through your actions or someone else's, that maybe those two things click together, and it gets to a point where uh, it may click for them in that way. I was just talking with my sponsor about, he had like a sponsee that was working with him a little bit, and then they got to a certain point and this guy stopped talking to him, and he got another one, and my sponsor, we're talking with each other how he felt and like not resentful, but he was hurt by that, even though it said like we wish the best. But it's just like the idea of, once you have like long-term sobriety, if you will, our resentments or things like that are a little bit more sneaky, a little bit like not as obvious, I guess, in early recovery. I think like in early recovery, I had a lot of immediate hate that I needed to address, like, these kind of like crosses that I was carrying continuously every day, always on my shoulders, kind of. But I think it's interesting to look at like the ways in which like emotional emotional sobriety or emotional like ties to whether it's like in an AA setting or a treatment setting, like that boundary setting, or like setting the boundaries so that whether they stay with you or it works or it doesn't work or whatever, that you're okay still, like and that you don't have this kind of thought about it that they're not even aware of. But I did want to ask real quick, because I know I was thinking as you were talking about in a treatment setting, I feel like being a therapist in that, it's like you're working with these people in like a 1, 2, 3 month span, and then they're gone. And I feel like in a private practice setting, which you also do, is maybe more long term, more than 3 months, and you able to maybe build more of a relationship and a rapport and continue work. And I wanted to ask, because I have always been interested in this. I don't think I've ever asked you in person, but what's the difference between, I guess maybe like pace even, or like goals, or with it when you know you have at most like, maybe 3 months, as opposed to private practice where it may be, you may have years with someone.
Sure. Yeah, that's just as a little bit of context, I've worked in a couple different settings, and they're all different. Like, really, like I've worked in a community mental health setting where it's typically like a very low fee but like low barrier to entry, where folks are seen that are in high needs. Some of them are court involved, and um, and they also have like their life challenges of like socioeconomic marginalized identities, where it can almost make therapy really difficult. Kind of worked in a setting like that, work in a private practice setting where, like you described, where it's like, hey, begin a relationship and meet, generally weekly, and kind of working on some things. And then, in a treatment setting where, hey, it's 1 to 3 months, and it's, multiple times a week. And the work looks different in each one of those settings for multiple reasons. One, the logisticals of it, of like, oh, I'm seeing somebody once a week, and in a private practice kind of setting, and our work is kind of at a lower burn but at a longer kind of way. And generally somebody that's engaging in therapy like that is, they're they're not in as acute of a moment in their life where like they're still out there doing, you know, the things that are important in, whether it be social, occupational, family. You know, but in a treatment setting, the person entering is in a bit of a more challenging moment in their life because their experience was, you know, such that they needed to take a step away from everything and come to treatment. So, you know, they're already stepping in the door in a way that's like, oh, they need more support. But in that treatment setting, I feel like we, you know, one, it's an entire team effort, right? There's people that are interacting with that person throughout the day, every day, and we're collaborating. And while yes, I'm their therapist, I also am there like, hey, we're both grabbing a banana at the same time. Oh, we're able to like have a conversation about what they're watching on television as they're doing it. You're able to witness interactions that people are having and see like how they're showing up and maybe how they're changing over time. So it's like the texture of the work kind of is like so much more than just kind of meeting once a week. So it kind of is like you're diving deep and we're doing it over like a shorter period of time, but because we're diving deeper and because the, you know, the whole team and exposure is like much more in depth, it's almost like, oh, we can get to know each other really well in, you know, a month to 3 months.
Mhm.
And you know, and it so and I think that it's like it looks different, you know, it's like, and I'm cautious to, you know, not say that it's because it's not that it's better or it's less better. It's just, you know, based on the point in time in somebody's life, the need that's there. But it can be a real gift because in like 30 to 90 days, seeing somebody like have such big transformation
Mhm.
because, you know, the level of support that they've had. And, you know, it's a mindset shift when I'm meeting with somebody on a weekly basis. It's like, okay, like I don't get all that other stuff because that's not the nature of that way of engaging. Um, but it is, you know, the relationships kind of look different because at the end of treatment, there's generally the idea of like, oh, this person's going to have a goodbye ceremony, and then it's going to be like, you know, a time for them to move on to kind of their next chapter. Whereas with some of the kind of one-on-one work, it's like, oh no, we're traveling along together for, you know, as long as it feels like um, we're able to kind of make progress towards goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always thought that was that makes a lot more sense. I feel like all your answers, like if this was a test, which it isn't, would get a green check. Um,
I came
uh,
here to pass. Came here to get an A. Yeah.
I
um,
did. With some of the time we have left, if you're comfortable with it, kind of shift a little bit. You know, just because I people, you know, an individual like you who's been in this space, right, for half a dozen years, you said, right? Um, and as somebody, you know, myself, I don't know if I see myself going back necessarily to grad school, and going down that route, but I could see myself in the recovery space for a while. And you know, I'd love to, you know, kind of pick your brain and learn a little bit more about with your in your own recovery and in your own journey, what kind of tools do you use, you know, to keep yourself in a place where you're, you know, not only available for your clients, but you're living in an as a man in recovery who is, you know, who is spiritually, mentally, emotionally kind of fit, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, good question. You know, I think that I was thinking about this one and, you know, I think the the first one is, and I think it becomes the foundation is that embracing the mindset that the work never ends. embracing the mindset that it never ends. And so, but the work looks different personally, right? So, what my own needs might have been at 32 look different at 45. And the context of my life has changed so that, so I go to therapy. I have consultation groups with other therapists that allow me to not just talk about the work that we do with clients, but how we work as what it's like to be a therapist in a cumulative way, you know? Um, I also do different workshops that help me look a little bit closer at my own experience of like the experience of like my youth and the influences of those around me and how that's influenced my reactions or my response patterns. There was an era where I did quite a bit of like wilderness retreat work that was meant to be really intensively like self-reflective, that allowed me to kind of come to some like real important conclusions about big life shifts. So I guess I'm saying this to kind of paint the picture that it's never generally going to, for me, has ever been like a singular through line,
Right.
Because, the different eras require different things. And, the one thing that I think I've found, and this was like through graduate school, physical practice, so exercise and eating was really important to just make sure that the whole machine was kind of like, kind of well taken care of. And then the pandemic came and like upended the way that I took care of myself in some pretty significant ways. So what did I start seeing? I became more anxious. I became more difficult. Some of the things that were important to me in relationships became more challenging. So that meant that therapy had to change. That meant that the way that I sought support from others had to change. Early on in recovery, like rebuilding an ecosystem through, recovery groups was really important. And knowing that like, oh, I had a social landscape at that point that supported certain behaviors that no longer served me. So what did I need to do? I needed to dismantle part of the ecosystem and start planting the seeds for something new and different. So yeah, I think underlying all of it is the mindset that like, the work never ends. And now that I find it, it's like, oh, I find myself in my 40s and I start thinking about like, okay, having people, aging family members and coming to, what does it look like to deal with that, and the both grief of their aging and their health. It's going to mean that I now that becomes part of the kind of conversations that I have with those closest to me. Being in a relationship today means, oh, all of the attachment stuff that I have that, kind of underlies the way that I respond and react needs a closer look. So I guess I say all that it's never kind of one thing, but right now it's like, okay, therapy, oh, staying in touch with people. And, with therapists, it's hard not to talk about mental health or recovery, because the Venn diagram of us folks and kind of, those things are real overlapping. And then, I don't know, self-compassion, the idea that just because I went to grad school and I have a license to be a therapist means that I did those things. It doesn't mean that I know best. It doesn't mean that I'm like, going to show up and always have the things right. It doesn't mean that, that there's not going to be mistakes. And, probably the best thing I can do for myself is just like acknowledge my humanity and be compassionate towards it. Because, if I'm holding myself to some higher standard, then I'm gonna Yeah, it's just not going to go well.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear a lot in your answer, the importance of community and multiple communities. And I always, Andrew and I always try to point to that as one of the main things that you have to have as a foundational piece. Just in general. No, it's not even specific to recovery. It's just that shared experience, having people to talk to, and really, just go through everything with. I think I wanted to ask, like, in terms of the current state of uh this country specifically, I guess, but like mental health and substance, and it seems to be continuously going up in terms of, like, the fentanyl, and then there's this, and then there's that, and semi, it's like, in my opinion, the biggest epidemic, if you will, that we face. I think, like, where does, like, what do you think is I'm not going to say, like, what's the cure or how do we fix it all, or what's the big, how do you do it, but what do you think? Because I feel like there has to be an urgency for more attention to be put into, counselors or treatment, or funding in that way to try to stop it, because it feels like at times an unbeatable battle, and it feels like it's getting worse. How do you feel about that? And what do you think maybe the mental health space looks like in the next, like, 5-10 years to try to, I know that's a big question, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I like the question because I think that the three of us here are all playing a role in that space. And we have the opportunity to be leaders in that space, regardless of our role, regardless of like what we work in. So if people like us aren't having that conversation to be able to say like, oh, it would be nice to move in this direction, then, who's going to do it?
Yeah.
And that doesn't, and I think leadership is one of those things that happens in just like one-on-one conversations, leading with compassion, leading with seeking to understand. Doesn't have to mean like, oh, I need to kind of like, put my hands on my hips and start to kind of, you know, but yeah, as you were asking the question and kind of describing of course, the things that are going on, it's hard not to feel just a real like physical feeling of sadness when I think about um, the number of people out there that are really suffering with um, whether it be just purely a mental, not purely like it's like a mental health issue
Yeah.
that is and kind of really struggling with kind of living a life that maybe that person would want, or if there's someone that's dealing with substance and all of the different kind of seemingly like escalating and accelerating risks that come along with that.
Mhm.
It's hard just not to feel the pain. So it feels like first and foremost, it's important, I think, to all of us just to acknowledge that underlying all these things is just such, can be such sadness. And, um, you know, I, it would be amazing if there was an easy answer.
Yeah.
It seems like, you know, we're having more conversations in the world about mental health. And, I don't know, sometimes that feels like it can be performative.
Right.
I hope that it's not. Um, and, my hope is that, we're starting to see kind of earlier intervention, for young people. And in my limited work with kind of folks on the younger end of life, I'm hearing like some you know some hope in different ways that young people are talking about things and programs in schools that emphasize mindfulness and emphasize compassion. um you know um and there's still like a lot of hurt happening, and just because that's happening to younger folks, it's like, hey, I'm a person in my 40s, there's people that are, like that are dealing with the legacy of the way that substance abuse and mental health was stigmatized.
Right.
You know, I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about AIDS and gay men in the world and other people that are at high risk to that. It's like somebody's experience in their 20s of what it's like to talk about HIV is much different than somebody in their 60s or their 80s. And so it's like there's like kind of different things based on someone's point in life and kind of what built them as a person. Um, so I don't, it's a great question, but I think the fact that we're having a conversation here is showcasing that like the conversation needs to continue because it's people that are doing the work today that are going to shape the future. And yeah, I don't know. I think we should just like
Keep it rolling.
keep it rolling and maybe try to increase some of the compassion and understanding because it feels like, and we could do whole other podcasts on some of the divisive aspects of conversations that impact substance use and mental health. But compassion and understanding feel like the way that we try to turn it down or ease some of the suffering that exists.
Yeah. I completely agree. It was just real quick. I just wanted to, I think like that's like semi why we start sometimes with the guests with that question is like to open and to try to eat away. Some of the stuff that we do is just trying to normalize or show how human, because I think like some people outside of recovery or that don't have experience or direct experience, it's easier to just be like, that's what that is. I know what that is. I've heard it. I've seen it on TikTok. I've seen it on TV. I've seen what an addict is. And if you can put that like barrier in between you and like, I think it's just easier for people to compartmentalize some of those things. Cause if you really humanize someone, then, as you were saying, like that care and that hurt comes, which is uncomfortable, And so I think just like doing more things to show the human aspect of, even someone at their lowest, at some point was like on a swing, so it's like things like that kind of shift that perspective. I think a lot of perspective shifting has been happening, like you're saying. So that keeps me hopeful.
Awesome.
Yeah. It was amazing talking with you, Michael.
Yeah, I'm really glad. Yeah, I'm really glad to have the opportunity to be here to talk to you folks today. And I know that it feels good to have the two of you making sure conversations like this are happening and that, the beneficiaries of these are both the folks watching and the people that we do work with, right? Because when we do work like this, to have conversations like this, I think we can show up in a way that's, of greater service. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I just want to thank you too, for I've learned a lot today. And not just in terms of your story and your experience, but in how I can be of better service to those that I work with, and how I can be a better service to my own recovery and my own life. And I did want to just comment quickly on how beautiful your bookshelf is, color coordinated back there. I've been staring at it the whole time, and I love it.
Yeah, I owe that to my boyfriend who, kind of curated the colors and the
It's wonderful.
the nice, yeah. The other bookcases around our house, they adhere to an alphabetical order and not a color order. So so this is a pretty special one.
Well, kudos to your boyfriend.
Yeah.
I was waiting for you to talk about it. That's as selfish as it sounds, it was part of the reason I asked you what your tools in recovery were, because I was waiting for you to talk about books so I could point out your bookshelf. But I love it. And again, on a serious note, I'm very, very grateful to have heard your perspective today.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Super grateful to hear from you, and I've learned a lot from you, and I've said it, and I admire the work that you do, and I've seen, the impact that you've had on my life and others' lives, and you're a very special person. So I'm super, super happy that we got to talk today and discuss about all that stuff, and listening to you and Andrew. And episode 47 was a banger. Super, super, super grateful to be here. Thank you all for listening. This has been episode 47 with Michael, and we will keep coming back. Thank you.